When the billionaire saw his housekeeper's daughter scrubbing his clothes, everything changed. 3 days before the story all of Seoul would eventually be talking about, Kim Woo-jin stood outside a stranger's apartment door in the pouring rain, holding a small stuffed bear in one hand and a folded document in the other, still unsure whether he was brave enough to use it. His phone had rung 14 times in the last hour. He hadn't answered once. Whatever was behind that door mattered more to him than the empire he'd spent 11 years building, and he was seconds away from finding out if it was already too late to save either one. He hadn't planned for any of this 3 weeks earlier, when his only problem in the world was a $4 billion deal he had almost let slip through his fingers, simply because he had decided, for once, that he wanted to go home. Rain hammered the windshield as the car sliced through Seoul's flooded streets that night. Woo-jin barely noticed the storm outside. He had just done something he hadn't done in 11 years, walked out of a room full of investors mid-sentence, leaving the acquisition hanging in the air, because a strange, hollow ache in his chest made the thought of one more toast, one more hotel suite, unbearable. So he came home early. No warning, no driver announcing him. Just Woo-jin, soaked from the walk to the door, stepping into the marble silence of a mansion he had built to prove he'd survived. That was when he heard it. Water, splashing, coming from the laundry room, a room no one used at this hour. He walked toward it, expecting a careless staff member. Instead, he found something that stopped his heart cold. A little girl, no older than 4, stood balanced on a stool far too tall for her, both hands buried in a basin of soapy water, wrestling with one of his white dress shirts. The shirt was nearly bigger than she was. "Mommy said Mr. Kim likes his shirts clean," she whispered to herself, scrubbing harder. "I have to do it good. I have to do it good so Mommy doesn't lose her job." Woo-jin didn't move. Then the stool wobbled. He crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her just as she slipped, water and suds flying everywhere. "I'm sorry, sir. Please don't fire my mommy. She's sick. She couldn't come to work, and I didn't want you to have dirty shirts. So I—" Her voice cracked into tears. That single sentence hit him harder than any boardroom crisis ever had. If you're new here, welcome to Story Nest Tales. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment before we go on, because you do not want to miss where this one ends up. Now, let's keep going. Woo-jin was 36, and by nearly every measure the world used, he had already won. He owned one of Seoul's most powerful tech companies. Magazines called him untouchable. His mansion overlooked the Han River, all glass and silence, the kind of silence that photographed beautifully and felt unbearable at 3 in the morning. He'd built it all after losing both parents in an accident at 25. Grief had turned into ambition, and ambition into an empire, until he stopped noticing he ate dinner alone every night, that his birthday came and went as a calendar reminder, that the piano in his living room hadn't been touched since his mother last played it. Amar Nwosu had worked in his household for 6 years. Nigerian, early 30s, carrying herself with a dignity no uniform could hide. She never asked for anything beyond her wages, never once made him feel like his home was just a paycheck. He had never asked her a single question about her life outside these walls. And he hadn't known Zara existed until tonight. He carried Zara to the kitchen and wrapped her in a towel. "Where is your mother right now?" "At home. In bed. She has a bad fever. She said she'd come tomorrow. I promise. I just didn't want you to be angry." Mrs. Han, the elderly head housekeeper who had served this house since Woo-jin's parents were alive, appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. "I only stepped away for a moment, sir. I didn't know she'd gone into the laundry room. How long has Amara been sick?"
"MRS." Han hesitated.
"Weeks. She kept coming anyway. She was afraid that if she took time off, you might replace her. She never said a word. She was too proud." Woo-jin looked down at Zara, still shivering, watching him with the wary eyes of a child who had already learned what it meant to be afraid of losing everything. His success had never felt so completely empty. By morning, Woo-jin had made 3 calls before his usual 6 a.m. executive briefing. Seoul's most respected private physician, a cancellation of his entire day, and his own driver, personally, for Amara. "Sir," his assistant said carefully, "the Daehan call is in 40 minutes. The board's been waiting 3 weeks. Reschedule it. With respect, sir. Reschedule it, he said, already walking. Some things matter more than a deal. Amara was pale and sweating when he arrived at her small rented room, humiliation flooding her face before anything else. Mr. Kim, I was going to come in as soon as... Don't apologize. Just let me help you. She protested the entire ride to the hospital, protested the private room, protested until the doctor said the word severe, untreated infection that could have turned life-threatening within days, and had no strength left to argue after that. She stayed quiet a long time before she finally let her guard down. Zara's father left before she was born, she admitted, staring at the ceiling instead of him. I came to Seoul with nothing but a suitcase and a promise that she'd never feel like a burden to anyone. Your household was the first place that ever paid me on time, every time. I was terrified of losing that. You were never a burden, Woo Jin said. You kept a home running that I barely noticed I lived in. It took a fever and a 4-year-old with soap up to her elbows for me to see that. I'm ashamed of that. Amara studied him. Most men in your position wouldn't have noticed even then. Then I suppose, he said. I have some catching up to do. Why does it matter to you? She asked quietly. I'm your housekeeper. 6 years, and you never once asked my daughter's name before tonight. The question landed harder than she probably meant it to, and he let it. Because somewhere along the way, I decided that noticing people was a weakness I couldn't afford. I told myself it made me a better businessman. Tonight I found out it just made me a lonely one. I don't have a better answer than that yet, but I'd like the chance to find one. Amara didn't respond right away. She simply nodded once and let herself, for the first time in a long time, stop bracing for the catch. He had no idea how much that catching up would cost him. At Kim Enterprises, the whispers had already started. Choi Sung-ho, Woo Jin's executive vice president of 12 years, slapped a folder on the boardroom table. The chairman postponed a $4 billion acquisition to personally drive his housekeeper to the hospital. Do you understand how that sounds to our investors? He's allowed a personal life, one board member offered. He's allowed a personal life that doesn't threaten this company's stability, Choi snapped. Woo Jin built this empire on discipline. The moment emotion enters his decisions, we become vulnerable. Choi had watched Woo Jin bury his parents and rebuild himself into something unshakable. He believed, with everything in him, that softness was the one thing that could unmake it. What he never admitted to anyone, not even to himself most days, was that he had once watched his own sister lose everything trusting an employer's kindness, and he had promised himself he would never let sentiment blindside anyone under his watch again. It didn't make him right, but it made him dangerous in a way no one at that table understood yet. Zara stayed at the mansion while her mother recovered, and slowly, the house began to change. For the first time in over a decade, there was noise, small footsteps racing down marble hallways, crayon drawings taped crookedly to the refrigerator, off-key humming drifting from room to room like something the walls had been thirsty for. Why do you eat dinner by yourself every night? Zara asked one evening, watching him sit alone at a table built for 12. I suppose I've never had anyone to eat with. You have me now, she said simply, climbing into the chair beside him. He laughed, rusty, unfamiliar, but real. That same week, she started a habit that quietly rearranged the shape of his evenings. Before Mrs. Han carried her off to bed each night, Zara insisted on poking her head into his study. Who tells you good night? She'd asked him once, watching him work. No one, he admitted. No one. Her face crumpled, as if this were the saddest thing she'd ever heard. That's not allowed. Everybody needs a good night. From then on, it became a ritual. Good night, Uncle Woo Jin, she'd call from the doorway, then vanish down the hall before he could answer, leaving him sitting in stunned, aching silence every single time. The good kind of ache, the kind that meant something in him was waking back up. Mrs. Han noticed everything the way she always did. She watched the master of the house, a man who once worked past midnight 7 nights a week, start leaving his office by 6 just to be home in time for a 4-year-old's bedtime. She said nothing, but she began humming again as she moved through the kitchen. The way she used to, decades earlier, when this house still had a heartbeat of its own. One rainy afternoon she found him in front of an old photograph in the hallway. A younger Woo-jin laughing between a man and a woman. "Who are they?" "My parents. They died a long time ago. Do you miss them?" "Every day. Is that why the house was so quiet before we came?" He knelt to her eye level, surprised, as he so often was lately, by how easily she reached truths adults spent years avoiding. "Yes," he admitted. "I think it was." "Well," she said, slipping her hand into his. "It's not quiet anymore, so you don't have to be sad the same way." He held her hand tighter and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. A week later, a nurse at the children's ward mentioned, almost in passing, that Zara had given her only doll to a little boy crying in the waiting room the day her mother was admitted. A boy she'd never met, who had no toys and no parent beside him. She never told anyone. Mrs. Han only found out by accident. It was, Woo-jin thought privately, the single most impressive thing anyone in his company had done all year. A few nights after that, he came home to find Zara cross-legged on his study floor, tongue between her teeth in concentration, working on a drawing. When he asked to see it, she hesitated, suddenly shy, before finally holding it up. It showed four stick figures holding hands beneath a triangle roof. A tall figure, a woman with curly hair, an elderly woman with glasses, and a small figure in the middle holding both hands. Above them, in shaky crayon letters, she had written one word. Family. Woo-jin stared at it for a long time. Something in his chest that had been sealed shut since he was 25, standing in the rain at his parents' funeral, cracked open, just slightly. He didn't say anything to Zara. He simply folded the drawing carefully and slid it into his wallet, where it stayed from that day forward. Before we go any further, if this story's already got you hooked, make sure you're subscribed, because everything is about to fall apart, and it happens faster than you'd think. Amara recovered within 2 weeks and insisted on returning to work immediately. When Mrs. Han mentioned that Woo-jin had personally covered every hospital bill, Amara's stomach dropped. "You shouldn't have paid for everything," she said, finding him in his study. "I intend to pay you back. Every one. You don't owe me anything. Ido. I don't want anyone thinking I used my daughter, or my illness, to take advantage of you. No one who knows you would ever think that. You'd be surprised," she murmured. "What people are already saying." She was right, but what came next was worse than either of them expected. It started with a photograph. Woo-jin walking Amara into the hospital, his hand at her back. Within days, gossip columns were speculating about a secret relationship between Seoul's most eligible billionaire and his housekeeper. Then, 3 days later, the story turned into something far uglier. An anonymous tip reached a tabloid claiming that a diamond brooch, a family heirloom that had belonged to Woo-jin's late mother, had gone missing from the estate around the same time Amara was hospitalized. The headline didn't ask a question. It made an accusation. Billionaire's housekeeper under suspicion amid romance scandal. Amara's phone would not stop buzzing. Strangers she would never meet had already decided who she was. A thief, a schemer, a woman who used her sick child as bait. She read every cruel word twice before forcing herself to stop. Hands shaking, Zara asleep in the next room, unaware her mother's name was being destroyed online. "They don't know anything about me," she whispered to Mrs. Han, voice trembling between anger and heartbreak. "They don't know I scrubbed floors for 6 years so my daughter could have a warm bed. Now they're saying I stole from the family I served." "People believe the easy story," Mrs. Han said gently. "Not the true one. But Mr. Kim doesn't believe the easy story. Neither do I." It was small comfort against an accusation that could end with police at her door. The fallout reached Woo-jin too, faster than he expected. A major investor quietly withdrew from a partnership, citing reputational concerns. A morning talk show ran a segment questioning whether Kim Enterprises still had a chairman capable of separating his personal life from billions of dollars in shareholder trust. Reporters began waiting outside the mansion gates each morning, cameras ready, shouting questions about the missing brooch every time his car pulled out. Is it true your housekeeper is under investigation? Did you know about the theft before it happened? Are you protecting her because of a personal relationship? He said nothing to any of them. He didn't need to hear the answer to know exactly whose interests this story was serving. Choi did not invent the brooch story. But when it reached him, he recognized an opportunity, and he did nothing to stop it from spreading. In quiet conversations with board members, he let the theft rumor grow alongside the romance rumor, because a housekeeper facing possible criminal suspicion was far easier to remove from Woo Jin's life than one he simply adored. The board is losing confidence, Choi told Woo Jin bluntly. A missing family heirloom, a scandal involving your household staff. Investors are asking whether your judgment can still be trusted. And what would you have me do? Woo Jin asked, his voice dangerously calm. Let a woman be branded a thief over a rumor with no evidence? I would have you remember that sentiment has never built an empire. Only discipline has. And I would have you remember, Woo Jin said, rising, that I built this company, not the board, not you. And I will not be lectured about discipline by a man who's been quietly feeding reporters instead of putting out fires. Choi's expression flickered, just for a second, betraying more than he meant to. I've done nothing but protect this company's image. You've done nothing to protect it, Woo Jin said. You've simply decided it's more convenient for you if I look weak right now. Don't mistake my patience for blindness, Sung-ho. He walked out before Choi could answer. But the accusation was already loose in the world, and no amount of walking out of rooms could undo that. Amara made her decision alone, at her kitchen table, long after Zara had fallen asleep. If she stayed, and the accusation reached the police, it wouldn't just be her name destroyed. It could mean deportation, a permanent record, a future stolen from her daughter before it had even started. She couldn't gamble Zara's life on Woo Jin's ability to protect her from something this ugly. The next morning, she left a resignation letter with Mrs. Han and packed their few belongings before the sun was fully up. She didn't say goodbye. She knew if she looked at Zara's face, or worse, Woo Jin's, she wouldn't have the courage to do what she believed was the only way to keep her daughter safe. By the time Woo Jin came home that evening, the mansion was silent again. But not the silence he'd built his life inside for a decade. This silence had a shape, a Zara-sized hole in it. He walked from room to room calling their names, already knowing, with a sickness settling into his stomach, that neither of them would answer. 3 days later, Woo Jin closed the $4 billion acquisition he had once walked away from mid-meeting. The boardroom erupted in applause. Champagne was poured. Choi shook his hand and called it exactly the focus the company needed. Woo Jin smiled for the cameras and felt absolutely nothing. That evening, Mrs. Han found him alone in the dark living room, still in his suit, the untouched piano silent behind him. She left this, Mrs. Han said, holding out a folded paper. The morning they left. I didn't have the heart to give it to you sooner. It was a drawing of the mansion, every window colored warm yellow except one. Left dark, empty, colorless. Beside it, in Zara's uneven handwriting, Lonely Uncle. Woo Jin put his head in his hands and wept for the first time since he was 25, standing in the rain at his parents' funeral. It was Mrs. Han who finally said what she'd been holding back for days. Sir, I don't believe that brooch was ever stolen. Your mother had it sent out for cleaning and resetting 11 months ago, before she passed. I remember the receipt. I don't believe anyone checked the safe before that story ran. Woo Jin went cold. He went to the safe himself that night and found the original jeweler's paperwork exactly where Mrs. Han remembered it. Proof the brooch had never been missing at all. It had simply been convenient for someone to say it was. He didn't sleep. By dawn, he had a folded document ready, and he walked into an emergency board session still in yesterday's suit, dropping the jeweler's receipt on the table in front of every director who had spent the last week whispering about his judgment. This brooch was sent for cleaning 11 months ago, before my mother passed, he said. It was never in that safe to begin with and never missing. Someone chose to let a lie about a grieving, hard-working woman run in the press rather than spend 30 seconds checking a receipt, because it was convenient for them. His eyes moved to Choi, who said nothing, his jaw tightening. I want a public retraction issued today, and I want the source of that tip identified. If the board isn't willing to do both, you can accept my resignation this afternoon instead, because I built this company, and I will not watch it protect a lie over a person. The room went silent. One by one, the directors who had questioned his judgment all week began nodding instead. Then he got in his car, the retraction already being drafted behind him, and drove. Not to his office, but toward a small apartment above a noodle shop, ignoring every call that lit up his phone along the way. He stood outside the door a long moment before he found the courage to knock. Amara opened it, shock quickly hardening into something guarded. "Mr. Kim, you shouldn't be here. I don't care who sees. I know the truth about the brooch. It was never missing. I have the paperwork, and by tomorrow so will the board and every reporter who ran that story. Your name is already being cleared." She stared at him, stunned, but didn't step aside. And what happens the next time something inconvenient comes up? What happens when the next lie is smarter, or the board finds a reason that actually sticks? I can't build a life on you fixing things after they've already broken us. I've spent my whole life being someone people discard the moment it's inconvenient to keep them. I won't let Zara learn that lesson too. You won't have to, Woo Jin said, because I'm not asking you to trust a promise. I've already given the board an ultimatum. I told them the truth about what Choi did on record with my name attached to it, whether you open this door tonight or not. There's no version of tomorrow where I take that back. I didn't come here hoping it would convince you. I came here because it was already true before I knocked. Amara's arms, crossed tightly over her chest, slowly loosened. You did that before you even knew if I'd forgive you? I did it because it was right, he said. Whether you forgave me was never going to change that. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, searching for the doubt she expected to find, and not finding it. A small voice erupted behind her. Uncle Woo Jin. Zara threw both arms around his legs. He knelt immediately, pressing her forgotten teddy bear into her hands. You forgot someone important. I thought you didn't want us anymore, she said, clutching the bear. That is the furthest thing from the truth I have ever heard. He rose to face Amara again, her eyes wet, her pride still fighting her heart. I'm sorry, she whispered. I thought leaving would protect you. And I'm sorry for ever making you believe kindness has to come with conditions. You don't owe me anything. You and Zara gave me something I didn't know I was missing. A reason to come home. Come back. Not as staff. Not as something for gossip columns to argue about. Come home as the family that drawing already said we were. Amara looked at him a moment longer, then slowly nodded, and Zara let out a delighted shriek, hugging them both at once. Months later, the mansion by the Han River was unrecognizable to anyone who'd known it before. The piano was played badly and often by small determined fingers. The dinner table built for 12 was finally, regularly, full not just with Amara, Zara, and Woo Jin, but with the families of employees he now invited for weekend meals. On Sundays, the smell of jollof rice and japchae competed in the same kitchen, and nobody complained about either. Choi Sung-ho resigned before the board could force the issue, though Woo Jin, to the surprise of nearly everyone, offered him a quieter advisory role months later. Not out of forgiveness exactly, but because Mrs. Han once told him that a man who fears losing everything to kindness has usually been burned by it before, and that the house had room, eventually, for that kind of healing too. Woo Jin launched a foundation that spring, not named after himself, but called Zara's Gift, funding scholarships, emergency medical care, and family support for every employee across the company. Inspired by a 4-year-old who once gave away her only doll to a stranger and never once mentioned it. Mrs. Han, watching it all unfold from the kitchen doorway one evening, finally told Woo Jin something she'd carried quietly for years. Your mother once took me in the same way, you know. I came to this house with nothing, and she gave me a home instead of a job. I always hoped this house would remember how to do that again someday. It seems it finally has. Woo Jin said nothing for a moment, only looked at her, understanding for the first time why she had watched this whole story unfold with such quiet, patient faith instead of surprise. On a bright autumn afternoon, Woo Jin stood at the edge of Zara's preschool playground for Family Day, unsure where exactly he was supposed to stand among the other parents. He felt suddenly, uncharacteristically nervous, the kind of nervous no boardroom had ever managed to make him feel. Zara hesitated at the classroom door, scanning the crowd until she found him, and for one long second, his old fear returned, that he would always be standing just outside the family he loved, watching it from a careful distance. Then she ran, crossing the playground at full speed, small fingers wrapping around his without a moment's hesitation, laughing the whole way. The same way they had the very first night he found her on a stool with soap up to her elbows, terrified he'd be angry, and finding instead a man who would never let go of her hand again. Amara caught up a step behind, slightly out of breath, smiling in a way that still, even now, undid him a little. Her teacher smiled as they approached the stage. "Mr. Kim, thank you for joining your family today." He didn't correct her. There was nothing to correct. Kim Woo-jin spent 11 years believing success was measured by the size of an empire, the height of a building, the number of zeros on a balance sheet no one but him ever truly read. But it took one small girl, scrubbing a shirt far too big for her hands, to teach him what no boardroom ever could. A house doesn't become a home because of marble floors or river views. It becomes one the moment someone inside it is loved enough to be missed when they're gone, and brave enough to be welcomed back, even after everything almost fell apart. If the story genuinely moved you, don't scroll away just yet. Friend, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new to Story Nest Tales, and tell us in the comments which moment hit hardest, the brooch, the drawing, or the good night at the study door. We read every comment, and we've got so many more stories waiting for you. See you in the next one.